Welcome to the Legal Leaders Podcast, brought to you by LawVu, LawVu's community for in-house legal professionals, where we dive into the heart of the legal profession to bring you unfiltered discussions with industry titans on a broad spectrum of topics.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Legal Leaders Podcast. I'm David Lancelot, your host, the CLO and EVP of Advocacy at LawVu. And I have the pleasure and honor to have with me today Ron Bell, who is currently the Chief Legal Officer and Chief Administrative Officer of Collective Health, and has a really fascinating career here in the Valley. And I can't wait to hear more about that. Ron, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, David. Thanks for having me.
And where are you coming to us from today, Ron?
Today, I'm literally coming to you from my home in Silicon Valley, and as you can see, from my kitchen, which is where I was relegated during the pandemic from working from home and have never really recovered. So shows what clout I wield around here.
Yes, indeed. Well, it helps with the humility. When
It definitely helps with
out in the world, you're the general counsel, the CLO, and you come home and you're in the kitchen.
Absolutely.
I love it.
Cooking up legal excellence. That's what
damn. Nice. Nice. Starting with a pun. I love it. So, Ron, how we met, I like to start with. Some time ago now, I think it's at least 10 years ago, I was in my early time at eBay, having done a bunch of other stuff and then ended up at eBay. And I was working my way into some sort of legal and business leadership stuff, and somehow I thought I should reach out to sort of top people in the field, general counsels who had the respect of the profession in the Valley, and ask them, is the direction I'm going in the right one, I guess, a good one, any kind of feedback would be appreciated, basically. And I reached out to you, I think it was on LinkedIn, and you clearly had never heard of me, understandably, random dude from the UK. And you said, yes, happy to meet with you, happy to talk to you, happy to look at your deck, which was, very early days in my thinking about what the in-house profession is and what legal leadership is. And we met up and had a coffee. So that's how we met, which to me is still extraordinary that you were willing to say yes, especially with what you were involved with at that time. And then most recently, we ran into each other at a conference, the Running Legal Like a Business conference in Vegas, and sort of picked up where we left off, like a time machine. So it was super awesome to see you there. And since then, we've run into each other again at the Newtonics Legal Offsite, where we were on a panel together. Thanks to Brian
I think the
Martin.
theme here is if there's free coffee involved, there's no problem.
Go where the free coffee is, and you will see Ron there.
You'll find me.
Yes, he's been kicked out of his kitchen. And now he's at a legal team offsite telling everyone about his amazing story. So that's how we met each other. And I am so happy to have you here today, Ron, to hear more and to spread the word about what you've done and how you think about the in-house legal profession and legal leadership in particular. And I think what we should probably do is start off with your backstory, right? Like how you got into the legal profession in the first place. What was it that inspired you to become a lawyer?
I fell into it is probably the right answer. I'm always impressed when I listen to a podcast like this and someone starts off and they go, I knew I wanted to be a lawyer from the age of 2, right? And I love people like that. It's so inspiring. I was not one of them. I did not know what I wanted to do. I took 5 years to get through college, still trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And applied to law school. At the time, I knew a couple of things that I liked or had been interested in before. I mean, one of them was technology from a very early age. We had an Apple II at home. We were very fortunate to have one. They were fairly new at the time, and took the first AP computer science exam ever given back in 1984. Apple Pascal, by the way, for those who want to know how long
I remember
the knowledge
Pascal.
actually carries forward.
Yep. Still
my brother
in
and I
use today, right? Still, everybody's programming in
Oh
Pascal.
yeah, everybody. It's
Totally.
absolutely. It's you have to know Apple Pascal to do anything. But my brother and I had been very interested in computers and programming. He's a programmer now, and we had been creating software for others. And one of the things we created was called an electronic bulletin board, which in the precursor to the internet was basically you dial up into somebody's computer and you can leave messages and play games and do email and have conversations, much like you could on a mainframe, but it's one-to-one and one at a time. And I was fascinated by that. I just thought that was so interesting, that whole area of media and technology and that intersection. And I loved writing. So I became, editor of my college paper and just had all of this interest in that. But I've just been always interested in people and systems and social systems. And I think programming is just, one way of structuring the world, right? And writing is another way of structuring the world. And they're all about understanding people and their motivations and their behaviors. And it kind of led me to law. And originally I thought I was going to be a journalist and write about legal topics. But as Coach Reality intruded, it became obvious that wasn't such a great plan for me, at least at that stage. And so I fell into doing a general commercial and media and IP law at a firm that had a practice in that area, and loved it. Like it just felt very natural to me. The issues were things I was very familiar with and had been thinking about. And I just loved the way that law reflects in some way the way that society sees itself and how people resolve disputes with each other. And was always very fascinated by the human aspect of the law. Like I would read cases in law school, like Schechter Poultry. And yes, there's what it stands for that you have to know for law school. But I was always fascinated, like how did a chicken farmer, what was so crazy important that they had to go to the Supreme Court, right? Like what was it, what were the series of decisions that got made along that way that led there? And that's influenced a lot of what I now do in-house, where I'm not dealing with the chicken farmer, of course, but I'm dealing with other people who are facing challenges, and the law is a tool to help them, one of the tools to help them think about how to solve those things and move a business forward.
And so and I think I've told you this before, we had an Apple IIe, and I also feel very fortunate to have had one of those back when we first moved to the United States in Chicago as a kid. Obviously, we only used it to play video games on, but it was still awesome, right? I love those machines. And you had the amazing experience of, and I don't, Ron, like if you're comfortable, where you grew up, are you from the Valley? Is that?
No. We moved around a lot. My parents were academics, so
Okay.
I was actually born in Oakland, California, which for those who are listening is in the Bay Area, but across the Bay from San Francisco. And then we lived in New York for a while, in Los Angeles, and then I lived for a time in Chicago before I moved back to the Valley. So I was from here, but at a long, time adjacent.
Right on. So you weren't like born to be a technology person in the way some people who grow up in Palo Alto or something.
I didn't grow up in Palo Alto in a garage, but in a way I think I was born to be a technology person. It was just it just was in the blood from, I would always take the toys apart and try to figure out how to put them back together. I was really good at taking them apart. I was not so good at putting them back together. So it's good that I stuck with law, not engineering.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Maybe the people who can actually put them back together, they become engineers, and we who mostly just break things.
And we say, it's going to be illegal if you break that thing apart. That's our job.
Man. Yes, the patent issues.
Yeah.
So you've graduated from law school. You're working at a law firm. How did you make the leap then? I think it was to Apple, right?
It was to Apple. Yeah. Well, this was, I guess, about the mid to late 1990s, roughly 96, 97, somewhere in there. The the commercial internet was just beginning to take off in the Valley. All you could hear about was technology companies, right? And I really felt, as much as I loved the firm I was at, and I really did, I felt like, boy, Silicon Valley is where all the action is. That's where things are happening. Initially, I applied to law firms. I didn't really go immediately in-house. But as I looked around, it seemed like, wow, what I really wanted to do was be part of a company that was making these products and helping to change the world. But I was largely shut out. It was really hard to be a litigator from Illinois, applying to a technology in-house, company in Palo Alto, let's say. And I made my way to Apple. At the time, Apple was having some difficulties, of course, itself. It had had a lot of success with the Apple II, some success with the Macintosh, not as much with the Lisa, and was kind of wobbly at that point. So they were in that transition phase where some people were leaving and others were coming in, and there was an opportunity, as it happened, not initially when I applied, but over time while I was looking around. And I joined and became a hardware licensing lawyer. So I took all what I had learned from the technology, from the my interest in technology and the litigation side of it, and then said, okay, if I were writing this agreement, how would I write it so it's more airtight? How would I think about what really matters in an agreement if we actually had to dispute this, and so on and so forth. And it was awesome. I mean, the department couldn't have been more welcoming, and basically they taught me licensing law, right? And it was such a wonderful experience to be at this company that was reinventing itself, literally. I was there before Steve Jobs came back through his return and the launch of the iMac. And I think the last product I worked on was called the iBook, which was sort of the power book or a laptop version of the iMac, right?
Yep.
Colored computer with one of the first computers, as I recall, may have even been the first laptop with Wi-Fi in it.
Awesome. You must have some cool old company swag.
I have some very cool old company swag.
Yeah, I'm jealous. I love my company swag, so I'm pretty jealous about that. And then back in '99,
yeah,
you made the leap to sort of the internet, like straight up pure internet at Yahoo, and had a very long run at Yahoo. So maybe tell us about how you made that transition from Apple to Yahoo and how you sort of moved your way through Yahoo.
Well, yeah, I mean, Apple was a company that was kind of had shrunk to grow. So at the time that I was there, we had taken what was this very broad, very complicated product line and broken it down to a consumer laptop and a consumer desktop and a business laptop and a business desktop. I mean, the professional version, right? So there were really 4 products. iCloud was sort of starting to come out as something conceptually on the roadmap, but they weren't operating eWorld or online services anymore. And so I looked around the Valley and a lot of the action was in the internet companies, right? It felt like that was an area that for growth I wanted to be in. There was not that hardware and software weren't going to continue to be important. But I really felt like, wow, I'd really like to be part of this because a lot of the issues that I dealt with when I was designing, say, the BBS or, thinking about the media, those are the types of issues that are coming to the fore. And I feel really well positioned for that. So applied for the job at Yahoo, eventually was lucky enough to land that. But I deliberately, consciously is probably the right word rather than deliberately. I consciously took a demotion, actually. So I was a senior counsel at Apple to a corporate counsel at Yahoo, because I thought that the area that they were in and the upside was just something that was too good to pass up. There were quite a few internet portals at the time. Terra Lycos, Alta Vista, AOL was out there, Yahoo, and so on and so forth. But Yahoo was that company that was transformative and ascendant and had this really cool brand and was in so many different areas that it felt like you were almost, as a lawyer or as a product person, wow, the sky's the limit, right? Like I can try anything. I can be a part of so much and learn so much in one place. And so started as a corporate counsel, eventually graduated to running a technology. At the time I started, I was doing all of what was called the technology transactions at Yahoo, which was basically licensing website features and technology, less the selling. But over time, I ended up running the tech transactions practice, and then the transactions practice generally for the Americas. I ended up as for 3 years as running the patent portfolio when another lawyer left. Helped bring in legal operations to the company.
Wow.
Fairly early on, we were one of the first, not the first, but one of the first companies in the Valley to do that. And eventually became deputy general counsel, sort of overseeing really most of the Americas, and then eventually general counsel.
Right on. Of Yahoo.
Yeah.
Just to be clear. So that's a fascinating, Apple to Yahoo in both of those periods of time. I mean, really an extraordinary place to be. And we could go way deep into the coolness of the tech and the awesome swag, but this is the Legal Leaders Podcast. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about how your role, both as an in-house lawyer and as a leader, evolved during that time period. If you think there was a change from beginning to end, et cetera, beginning to after Yahoo and currently.
I do, and I think in many ways it evolved with the company, right? So and the opportunities. So as I said, I started as a junior person, not as a manager. I wasn't a leader in anything in any sense, and did a series of progressive roles in different areas, both as a manager and as an individual contributor. And I think what I learned from that experience, looking back on it, is a couple of things. I mean, one, change is constant. So you have to, both as a leader and as a contributor, be educating yourself about the business, about the industry, about the trends, about where the competitors are going, and helping to shed some light on the way forward. The second thing is doing so many different roles, like IP roles and transactional roles and legal operations and so on and so forth. Every single one of those roles teaches you. It's like that old saw about the blind men who kind of come up to the elephant and one grabs the trunk and says the elephant's like a snake, and one grabs the ear and says the elephant is like this and that and such. It's all part of the same company, but you're seeing a different perspective, a different set of issues that come to the fore, a different set of stakeholders. And it trained me to think very much about who are the stakeholders for any decision that we have. Are there people I need to include, people I need to incorporate? What are each of the different stakeholders concerned about? Is there a revenue concern that one person has? Is there a strategic and product concern someone has? Is it just a political concern? My business is not doing as well as another business, or is doing better, right? How do I do international expansion and so on and so forth? And I found that the more I understood even each of these individual pieces, even though they don't really necessarily lead one way to the other, it informed me in the sense that I think a lot of what you need to do as an in-house leader is be able to connect the dots, be adaptable, speak in terms that the business understands, ask a lot of questions so you understand the people that you are working with, and then be absolutely flawlessly reliable, both as a manager and a team member and a leader in showing the way, leading, and helping to advance business interests. That was sort of the change from the law firm life, where and I want to be clear. I'm not saying law firms don't advance business interest or that law firms are lesser in any way, but the focus of the law firm life was on the business of law, which was the provision of advice. The provision of advice for an in-house counsel is an important part of the job. Don't get me wrong. It's a very important part of the job. it's also important to understand the strategy of the business and where it needs to go, because you are, among other things, a repeat player. You will see a contract, and I was at Yahoo. You didn't mention, you thankfully and kindly did not mention how long, but I was at Yahoo for almost 18 years in the end. Okay, so I did a lot of different roles over a long period of time. And that meant I saw deals from beginning to through their life cycle. So I saw things that worked and didn't work. I saw technologies that evolved and got supplanted by other technologies. I saw executives come and go and so on and so forth. And I think that there is a lot of value in seeing things from so many different perspectives and then bringing that back to the table and saying, hey, have you thought about this? Or I know this isn't an issue now, but what if this changes? This other deal we did, thus and such happened. And it's about you learn to build trust, you learn to build relationships, you learn to build continuity because you are a repeat player. Whereas at a law firm, you may have a client, and you may do a lot of work for that client, but chances are they bring you in for like when they need a law firm, right? Like it's big, heavy lifting stuff where your legal expertise and the depth of your legal capacity is needed. Everything else goes through the in-house team, right? This was also a time, I have to say, David, like as a leader, if you were to go back in time, I think to like the early part of the 90s and then kind of fast forward, there was a change even in the legal function in-house, right? It used to be that all the quote unquote cool work, important work was sent out, and the in-house team in many ways outside of the corporate part of the business was really managing outside counsel doing work. That was kind of the mantra. When the internet came about and so many companies were expanding globally and new and novel issues were coming to the fore really quickly, it sort of forced a kind of specialization and growth of the in-house function, so that some of that work that was on the outside was now being done on the inside because there was no real advantage to sending it out. These were all cases of first impression. And from an expense standpoint, it made sense to bring it in. So there was a real opportunity to learn and contribute and be in the, as Hamilton would say, the room where it happens, that probably hadn't existed before. And I was lucky enough to work with some really terrific people over the years, and in a company that was exploring a lot of different businesses. So I got a chance to explore and learn along with them. And that was a real opportunity. So how that shaped me as a leader is really just trying to encourage the people who work for me, like, don't think in terms of what you do today. Think in terms of what the business needs tomorrow. What skills do you need to pick up? What certification would it be helpful for you to get? Not because the certification will sell it, but because knowing that knowledge is important, right? When I started, I think you could have argued privacy was important, but people really didn't understand it yet back in 1999. Today, privacy is important to everything that we do in almost any business. And so the baseline level of knowledge you need just to be a guy or I said guy, but I mean any lawyer who does work in the transactional space is so much more. That basic level has gone up, and so it's really important now to have a foundation in privacy and understand the basics in a way that probably wasn't back in the days when I first started. Even though those issues were there, we just didn't really appreciate them in the same way.
Yes. Well, and I love hearing, your thoughts on that. What drove the evolution of the profession? Because I often think of the in-house profession as a relatively new one. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean 5 years old. I mean like the legal profession, there were lawyers in Rome,
Right.
Real Rome, like the old
Mm-hmm.
days. Not Rome today. There's plenty of lawyers there too. They're awesome. But old Rome. But in-house lawyers, what drove, and I think maybe it's the transition from a particular generation of that practice. And I often say, like, when I was in a similar position, it was a sort of air traffic controller for law firms. Like my job was sort of take my private practice role of spotting and mitigating risk for my clients and doing research and, providing advice, and take that in-house. But I don't have time to do the advising and I'm not the expert, so I'll call a law firm.
Right.
And I really love what you said about, like, the fact that everything was first impression drove the people who were in house and the business people that employed them to say, like, this isn't a law firm issue. We can do this in house and we can figure it out as we go. And I was at eBay, and I wasn't there when they made the law of the internet like you did at Yahoo, right? But I've heard those stories about, they were really right there at the coalface, really developing things.
I think there's a couple of factors that drove that. One is technology, which we were talking about. The fact that companies suddenly had to change their business models and expand and figure out how to scale that very quickly. Like, that was the first. The second was like cost. I mean, it's really expensive. Even the best law firms, it's really expensive to send things out. And many of the types of issues that were coming up and were coming to the fore, it wasn't like one person could look at them and solve all the issues. It was almost like a mash unit where you'd bring in the privacy lawyer and the IP lawyer, right? And the transactional lawyer, hopefully not, you don't have to get the litigator, but sometimes the litigator, right? And you would think about these issues for the first time and try to figure out, what does a terms of service look like? What should these issues be? How do we resolve that? Like, what does that mean? And for that, you need both specialization, you need to be close to the business, and you need a collaborative environment where people work together. So, and the expectations of working together were much faster because now you have email and you've got cell phones, and we didn't have apps yet, but you could see that eventually might be a thing. I think the second thing was there was so much pressure on businesses to grow in this period, and there's always pressure on businesses to grow, but like shareholder activism, really kicked off in the 80s and 90s. And so, if you're at a company that isn't growing, you've got a problem. And I think indirectly, even outside of the boardroom, that pressured companies to take bigger risks, right? Take a look at Blockbuster, which was a huge power name, right? But they didn't adapt to that transition to the online services, as well as Netflix, which was also distributing on DVD and so on and so forth, did. And now they're gone, right? Mm-hmm. And so there was a real imperative. We've got to move fast. We've got to move efficiently. We've got to move forward. I think the third thing was honestly, like, there was a growing understanding that you needed to be close to the business to influence decisions early on in the product development cycle, because the cycles were moving quickly, and the cost of going back to try to fix things, even though it was easier, in internet software, the cost of having to go back and having a misstep and having to refactor all of this code and figure everything was so much higher. And this was also the era of Enron, right? So you had this ethical issue, right? That was out there, like, oh no, like, what can happen? And the focus of regulators on lawyers as being a kind of gatekeeper for the business, sort of an ethics keeper. I don't think that's totally fair, because one, I don't think there's really a gate we get to shoehorn them through. And second, I don't think lawyers are the only ethical people in a company. I don't think that's fair. But I do think that the expectation that lawyers would speak not just for themselves, but to some extent for the legal system and the profession was a part of it. And it's only so easy to do that if you're close to the decision and in the room when it happens. It's hard to put it back into the jar. And then the last thing I would say is, like, you've got highly, specialized, now global in-house legal teams working with a vast variety of new issues across multiple jurisdictions. The complexity is tremendous, and that leads to running legal like a business, literally, which is because if you have to manage that complexity, you have to be thinking strategically about the law and the function and how can I move this business forward, not just in the individual instance, but because legal touches every single function in the company in one way or another. You're either a catalyst or an impediment almost all the time. And so, the thought of, where can I be a catalyst where we need speed? Where can I be impediment where we need, probably the wrong word, but where can I slow things down when we need to go slow and be deliberative and thoughtful, and to bring that perspective, that was there too. So a lot of things were converging, I think, at the same time, that just sort of drove this movement of a lot of the work and thinking in-house in ways that it hadn't before, and really shaped both the careers and the thinking of those of us who were there at the time.
I'm glad we recorded that, Ron, because that's super interesting to get your insights there. I often think about like how did we get where we are, and how do we help the people who are on their way up to have a model, a role model, or just a framework to ensure that, you know, when they come out of law school or come out of private practice, they have something to use as that model. Because I think because the profession has evolved so quickly and so dramatically, there still isn't somewhere you can go and be like, okay, this is how I do this job.
Or I can, you know, I was at Yahoo for 18 years, which most people don't do that. And most people it wouldn't make sense even to do that, because there wouldn't be that necessarily that opportunity. As I look back, I mean, one of the things that stands out to me, David, on what you're talking about, you really can't predict the future all that well. You can sort of know what makes sense for you now, and then you can keep an eye on how technology and the business and opportunities are evolving, and take that next step on the escalator, right, on that moving walkway. But it's really hard to connect the dots in advance, particularly in technology, where the technologies that I did a lot of work with didn't exist when I came out of law school. The companies I worked with the exception, you know, of the law firm and Apple as it had existed prior, you know, didn't exist. And so you can't really predict that, right? What you can be is adaptable, creative, thinking about what's around the next corner, thinking about, you know, what opportunities does this create for the business, and what opportunities might that create for me? Could I volunteer to do something? If it's new to the business, could I volunteer to run it or learn about it? Does it even, if it doesn't make sense, could I at least volunteer to be someone to back up and learn about it, right? Be in backstop someone else. It's not about the politics. It's about really thinking in terms of, you know, what does this experience in this place expect of me? I think what was a big transition to me, I think, from law firm life is I sort of think of like, people would come to the law firm and they would say, you know, you are in this place of knowledge, in the temple of knowledge, you know, help us, right? And I always felt like I was kind of in the role of Sherlock Holmes, right? Sherlock Holmes is that guy, you know, in all the books, who has the answers to everything.
Yep.
Right. And if he doesn't, he is able to easily adapt to it. And I think a better model for in-house counsel, honestly, is Columbo, right? Like, Columbo's completely unassuming, very friendly, treats everyone with respect, asks a lot of questions, genuinely interested in the answers, sometimes overstays his welcome, right? But in the end, right, absolutely razor sharp, committed to getting the right answers, you know, all the way through. And I think for in-house counsel, you know, and minus the raincoat, which we don't need, I think that's a good model, right? Be that person who's able to speak to everyone in terms they understand, who asks questions to confirm understanding, who doesn't need to have all the right answers, but who knows how to get to them. That to me is how you contribute. And that's a big part of the big part of the in-house counsel job.
Totally. Yes. Curiosity, humility. And I mean, I think there's also an element of just interest in the product, right? Excitement about what the business is doing, an understanding, asking all the questions, and building up, you know, rapport and trust with the business in that manner as well, so that you are invited to the room where it happens, getting invited to that business offsite, being invited to participate in the product review board, whatever mechanism you have for being there before the emergency happens.
Right. And it's predictive. A transition. I mean, that's, you know, we're talking now about being a legal leader, but when you become also a functional leader, so you're the general counsel, let's say at Yahoo or at Collective Health, which is where I'm at today, you're expected to be a part of the executive leadership team. And the executive leadership team is by and large, except for you, comprised of non-attorneys who are working with equal, expertise in their fields, probably more, to move the business forward. And you're part of that team and helping to think about strategy and anticipate issues and, backstop them. I want to expand in this area. Okay, well, here's what we're going to need to do. And then finding ways within the law and with your team to help clear the path. Might be public policy advocacy. It might be it might be getting approvals from the board or disclosures. It might be doing transactions. But in any event, you have the legal function leadership. You are a lawyer, right? But you're also a part of a leadership team, and you're expected to think strategically about the business and where does the business need to go. And that's a switch also. But a lot of that discipline of thinking about new angles and new problems and, not just from the legal standpoint, but seeing how things work at your company and at other companies and what didn't work, and then bringing that to the table is a big part of how you can contribute.
Absolutely. So the GC role at Yahoo is obviously, a huge responsibility, right? Like that's a foundational Silicon Valley internet business. And I imagine very challenging at times and exhilarating at times, with a pretty big, probably very big international function. Why you mentioned operations, because there's a huge gap in legal education, law firm practice in optimizing and accelerating a business, right? It's just not a thing we think about in those areas, although we're doing our best to change that in law school land. So how did you come to decide that operations was fundamental to what you were doing at Yahoo? How did you bring that in?
Well, originally, I wish I could say it was my idea originally, but I met with Connie Brenton, who was then at NetApp, who is a very familiar figure, of course, now in legal operations circles.
Yes.
And Connie's now husband eventually became not only our head of legal operations at Yahoo, but my chief of staff, Jeff Frankie. So I met with Connie, and she kind of laid out, like, I think there's a case to be made for running legal differently. And I just could see that she was right, because so much of what we were doing, we would have, for example, like there's before e-billing. And so we would have like a single paper bill would be passed around the office, right? From lawyer to look at the matters that related to them. And they'd all put a check mark or whatever. But if David Lancelot was out traveling right now, it sat on David's desk for like a year, right? Until he came back and found it, and so on and so forth. That wasn't a great model for expansion or for service. But what really drove me was thinking about the fact that legal operations, besides installing software or keeping track of costs, could be a strategic advocate and a strategic thinker for how the legal function could move the business forward. Because at the end of the day, the analogy I like to use, if you think about like a business, right? When I was at Yahoo, we built what became our corporate headquarters. If you had wandered by the field where nothing had existed before, and you were to look into that field, you would say, this is a company that is very, very interested in steel pipes and, men and women in hard hats and cranes. That must be what they're interested in. But in fact, that was just a means to get what we wanted, which was the new headquarters. Legal teams are in that function a lot. Again, the business of the company is not legal services. It's something else. Legal is a means to get what the company wants. So thinking carefully and strategically about how can this function advance the ball cost effectively, efficiently, thoughtfully, what types of personnel do we need, and where? How can we recruit a diverse team that represents, the communities we serve, so that makes us better able to spot issues, right? How can we grow and develop that team and hopefully inspire them, a lot of them to stick with us for a long time. So we have the benefit of all the knowledge and investment that we've put in to help move the business forward. Legal operations is core to a lot of that. And I think, one of the dangers right now that I see is when people say legal operations, they often mean, well, I got to install matter management, no offense to LawVu, right? They want to install a software package, or they got to keep the outside counsel down, or we've got to figure out how to do more with less. Yes, that's part of it. That is part of it. But, just like cost cutting or IT is not all of the rest of the functions of the business, so it isn't part of legal. And to the extent that legal operations gets pigeoned that way, I think there's a danger in a devaluation of the function and people not thinking that they need it as much or they can outsource it. What they can't outsource is your closeness to the business, your understanding of the function, your closeness to the issues the legal team is facing and the challenges, and your willingness, your ability, your interest in working with the legal leaders and the business leaders to make a difference. It's that personal connection, that engagement and understanding. And, I'll just say it, Jeff was a fantastic head of legal operations, a great chief of staff. I was very, very fortunate to have him by my side as we thought through some of those problems. And he always got that. He understood this is about strategy. This is about the long term. It's not about one single project. It's about moving the business forward. And that was a big part of how we brought it in. And the other part of it was Mike Callahan, who was the GC when I came with this idea, was always somebody who, and he's still a GC. He's at Rivian right now. He was always somebody who was like, if you've got a good idea and it makes sense to me, and you're willing to put the time in and effort to make it happen, go to it. Right? You're going to have to do it. Like, I got no additional resource. I got nothing to help you with, good luck to you. Right? Like, this is where we are right now, but go and do it. And I tried to take that from him. And so, when I became GC, one of the things we did was really expand our pro bono efforts in the community. And that came from a then young lawyer who had the idea that we should do something like that. And that as a large company, we had a real opportunity to contribute. And I was like, okay, go forth. You have my support. Let me know how I can promote this. And she did amazing stuff, just amazing, and moved it forward. So I think a lot of it is see the opportunity, offer yourself up, be creative, and then hopefully, work with people who are willing to give you some leeway to explore.
Oh, that's super cool to get that viewpoint, those insights from a very formative time in creating what I think of now as modern legal leadership back then. So now you're at Collective Health, which I have to say is our health insurance provider at LawVu. So thank you for that. I don't often do podcasts with companies that are our vendors, so that's pretty damn cool. So what's it been like going from Yahoo days to Collective Health days? I imagine there's pretty significant regulatory issues that weren't as front of mind at Yahoo as they are at a health business.
Well, there are a couple things that are different. Obviously, it's at least now a smaller business and a privately held business, and that was part of the attraction, honestly, because I'd been at Yahoo at a relatively early stage. The company went public, I think, in '96. So when I joined in '99, it had been a public company for a couple of years, but still a pretty young company. I think I was like employee 1,100 or 1,400, somewhere in there. Still pretty small. Those were great times. But as I shared when we started the podcast, a lot of this was cases of first impression and sort of, for better or for worse, kind of finding our way through things and sometimes smacking into walls, if we're honest. And I thought, gosh, now I'm older and I have all this experience. Wouldn't it be great to find a company and an entrepreneur that's trying to do something that really matters, like make healthcare more easier, more accessible, more affordable, easier to navigate, worthy effort in an industry. No one, except maybe what some of our customers says, boy, I really enjoyed open enrollment. Wish we could do that more often, right? Like no one, or trying to get a provider or get an answer to an insurance question. But a company that's trying to make a difference in that area and then help keep them from smacking into some of those shoals. Maybe they don't even know that they're there, right? But you just gently move, maybe if we went this way, I wouldn't do that, but if we could go over here, that would be awesome. The CEO is somebody who I had worked with actually at Yahoo many, many years ago. He left and went on to do other stuff. So I knew him. I knew he was, really sincere about wanting to make a difference in the world and do good. But I didn't know, candidly, I wasn't a healthcare lawyer. And so one of the parts of making that commitment was I got to roll up my sleeve again, learn as much as I can, and then also recognize, and I think this is an important part of being a general counsel, I do not have all the answers. I am not expected. You may feel like it some days, but I am not expected to have all the answers. And I am as good as the team that I assemble, and being a general counsel is always a team sport, right? And that is true for all legal teams these days, in general. And so really worked hard to find, compliance officer, heads of transactions and governance and so on and so forth, who really did have core experience in the areas that we needed, and who frankly could sometimes school me on like, you're wrong. Like, that's a great idea, but let's go in this other direction because of A, B, C, and D. That's gratifying for me because I'm still learning. It's helpful for them because I do have a perspective that may be different and some experiences that are different. And so it can be complementary to each other. It is a regulated space, but being regulated doesn't mean that you can't innovate. It just means you have to be conscious of their regulations, and they're there for a reason. And you have to have respect for why, not only that they're there and there's a rule, but why is the rule there? What interest is it there to protect, right? And try to internalize that, because even if you don't know all the rules from every jurisdiction, which is very hard to do, but we always try, you may know, hey, people want to be careful about bias. People are worried about bias, right? Or they're worried about automated adjudication that leads to errors, right? Okay, understanding that, what are we going to do to prevent those things from happening? And then sit down with the business and help have the conversations and introduce the issues and try to move it forward. Because I find, like when you talk to clients as, not as clients per se, but as fellow humans on a journey with some expertise and understanding to bring to the table, they respond a lot better than if you come in and try to issue an edict and, opine on the law, right? Like, again, going back to that field with the pipes in it, nobody wants pipes. They want to get from point A to point B. You get a lot better if you come in and you say, like, I see you want to build this headquarters, but if we put the parking lot over there, it'll be a lot easier for people to get in and out. And then we can put a ramp here for the disabled so they can get up and you can get all the legal pieces that you need into the website design and into the thinking about the services. And it's a constant path of relationship building and refactoring and asking questions. And even so, there's like days, I think this is true for any GC. There's days I go, I wish we had thought of that, or I wish we had taken a different turn on that. But if you do it right and you build those relationships, not only do you hit most of the things that you need to on time, but you build a trust and a company culture, I think, that respects and values not just the legal profession and the legal function, but doing things well. And that is so important in whatever business you're in.
I agree. 100%. 100%. But Ron, I feel like there's so much value here. We should just like keep the mic on wherever you go and record everything you say.
That would get a little creepy, David, but thanks for the suggestion.
Just so that we could get some more of that wisdom, but I don't want to take all of your time. I really, really appreciate you being here, and I'm really looking forward to speaking to you again soon. Thank you so much for being on the Legal Leaders Podcast. I know that all levels of legal professionals out there are going to get a ton of value out of this. And I know that through that and through the work you do every day, you'll continue pushing our profession forward. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you, everyone out there, for joining us on the Legal Leaders Podcast. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.
If you enjoyed listening, please hit follow and leave us a review on your listening platform of choice. We love engaging with our community and hearing from you, so please head to inview.lawvu.com. Thank you so much for tuning in.